Commander Sera Thal had never filed a backup request in 14 years of command, and she filed this one at 3:47 station time, in the sixth minute of an attack that had already taken out her station's primary defensive array, and was working systematically through the secondary systems with the patient, methodical precision of a force that had clearly done its preliminary survey work and knew exactly which systems to address in which order. She filed it precisely. The Kavari Compact's emergency protocol required specific language in a backup request, specific field entries, a threat level designation, and a resource request specification, and a current operational status summary. And she filled all of them with the complete care of a commander who understood that a sloppily filed emergency request produced a sloppy emergency response. And a sloppy emergency response in the current situation was something she could not afford. Threat level, Tier 2, escalating. Resource request, 1 to 2 combat-capable vessels, immediate deployment. Operational status, defensive capability degraded to 40% of standard. Personnel status, all stations held. Station integrity, primary hull intact. She filed it through the standard regional dispatch channel at 3:49, 14 seconds before the secondary array's forward section went offline, and she turned away from the communications console the moment the transmission confirmation appeared, because 14 years of command had taught her that filed was filed, and her attention was more useful elsewhere than watching a sent message sit in a queue. She did not expect an acknowledgement for at least 2 hours, which was the Regional Dispatch Center's standard response timeline for a Tier 2 emergency request in an outer corridor station, and she had already mentally allocated those 2 hours to the work of keeping her station's remaining 40% of defensive capability functioning at its maximum possible effectiveness. She had been back at the tactical console for 40 seconds when her communications officer, Dresh Cavan, spoke. "Commander." His voice had the particular quality it only carried when something had departed from expected procedure in a way he needed her to know about before he had fully processed it himself. "The emergency channel is returning an acknowledgement." Already, and the routing header on the acknowledgement is not regional dispatch. She crossed to the communications console, because some things required seeing directly rather than being told about, and she looked at the routing header on the incoming acknowledgement for a long moment. The Kavari Compact's Regional Dispatch Center used a 3-digit routing identifier. She had filed through that channel for 14 years. This acknowledgement's routing header contained 5 digits, and the prefix was one she did not immediately recognize, which was itself unusual, because she had read her operations manual thoroughly enough to have most of it available without consulting the reference. She pulled up the manual. The 5-digit prefix was designated Sol Coordination Fleet Primary Command, reserved for Tier 1 emergency response and direct fleet coordination communications. "That routing is for Tier 1 emergencies," Dresh said, reading over her shoulder. "I filed a Tier 2. "I know, Commander." She opened the acknowledgement. It read, "Commander Thal, Sol Coordination Fleet Command has received your emergency request. Reference number 7740-1S. Please confirm current position and whether your station can hold defensive integrity for 4 hours. We are mobilizing response assets. Signed, Admiral Yuan Zhang, Sol Coordination Fleet." The station shook under a secondary impact, and Sera gripped the console's edge with the automatic steadying reflex of someone who had been on damaged stations before, and she read the acknowledgement a second time, quickly, the way she read things when she needed to be certain she had understood correctly before she responded. "Admiral Zhang is the Sol Coordination Fleet's primary command officer," she said, mostly to herself, though Dresh was close enough to hear. "Yes, Commander." "I filed a Tier 2 regional dispatch request." "Yes, Commander." She looked at the acknowledgement for one more second. Then she looked at her tactical display, which was showing her the current situation with the pitiless accuracy of a system that did not editorialize. "Confirm our position to the routing address," she said, "and tell them we can hold for 4 hours." She returned to the tactical console, because 4 hours was the question she needed to answer with action rather than calculation. And the calculation she had just done in her head suggested the answer was technically yes, if she made several decisions in the next 20 minutes that she would otherwise have delayed. She started making the decisions. 300 light towers away, Admiral Yuan Zhang read calm. Sera Thal's backup request at 3:51 station time, which was the time it reached his command post after routing through the regional dispatch system that had, correctly, flagged it for his review based on the threat escalation profile, rather than simply queuing it for standard regional response. He was on his 4th cup of coffee. This was relevant only in the sense that it explained why he was at his command post at 3:51 station time instead of in his quarters, a habit that his staff had long since stopped commenting on because the commentary had never produced a change in behavior. He read the request once, the full field entries, and then he read the operational status summary again. Defensive capability degraded to 40%, primary array offline, secondary array forward section offline. The threat level designation was Tier 2 with escalating notation. The resource request was 1 to 2 combat-capable vessels. He sat with the request for approximately 30 seconds, which was about 25 seconds longer than it typically took him to make a straightforward dispatch decision. And the reason for the additional time was not uncertainty about what to do. It was the specific, focused mental process of a commander, identifying the full shape of a situation that the requesting officer could not, by definition, see clearly from inside it. A station at 40% defensive capability, under active attack by a force organized enough to have done its preliminary survey work, requesting 1 to 2 vessels, was a station that would receive 1 to 2 vessels and hold on the razor's edge of what those vessels could help her accomplish, or would not hold at all. He did not dispatch 1 to 2 vessels. He opened the SAL Coordination Fleet's Reserve Activation Protocol on his secondary display, the document he had opened 3 times in 11 years and acted on twice, and he began working through it with the particular efficiency of someone doing a thing they had prepared for doing without knowing exactly when it would be required. Then he sent Commander Thal the acknowledgement with the one question that mattered, because 4 hours was the variable his calculation depended on, and her answer was either going to confirm the decision he had already made or require him to find a faster one. Sera's answer came back in 40 seconds. Zhang read it, confirmed it, and picked up the command channel to his operations desk. "I need reserve activation," he said. "Full complement, 4-hour deployment window." His operations officer, Lieutenant Commander Amara Osai, did not ask why, which was one of the qualities he valued most in her. She asked the question that actually mattered, which was, "Current muster state." 11 years since last full deployment, he said. "I want everyone who's reachable in 2 hours on a ship that's clearable in 3. I'll start with the captains on short notice status." "Start with everyone. Short notice status can be in the water in 90 minutes. I want the full complement, and I want them knowing they have a 4-hour window to make it count." The first Captain Zhang's operations desk reached was Commander Elena Vasquez, who was on authorized leave at a station 9 light minutes from the reserve fleet's primary muster point, and who answered the channel with the immediate, fully present quality of someone who had been military long enough that their sleep was always, at some level, a listening state rather than an absence. "Vasquez," she said. "Commander, this is SAL Fleet Operations. Reserve activation in effect. Can you make the muster point in 90 minutes? There was no pause. "I need 60. She was at the muster point in 53. Her personal shuttle docked to the reserve vessel she had commanded for the last 3 of its 11 years of standby, and she was running pre-departure checks before Zhang's operations desk had finished reaching the next captain on the list. Commander Dao Yip received the activation notice while he was overseeing a dry dock maintenance cycle on his vessel, a circumstance that the activation protocol listed as a potential complication, and that he resolved by doing what he always did when an unexpected variable arrived, which was to determine the fastest path through it and take that path without discussion. "What's still non-functional?" he said to his chief engineer when the notice came through. "Navigation's secondary array needs another 6 hours to finish the diagnostic cycle. Run it at full output and we'll pull it early. What's the primary status?" "Primary's been green for 3 weeks. Then we're departing in 2 hours on primary. Log the diagnostic abort for later." He was at the muster point in 107 minutes, which was within the activation window, and he spent the transit running every system, checked the abbreviated preparation time allowed, because a vessel that deployed with an unfinished maintenance cycle was a vessel whose captain needed to know exactly which systems were going to be the variable. Captain Myra Solano's activation notice reached her during a training certification session. She was running for junior officers on a neighboring station, and she completed the certification segment she was currently delivering before dismissing the session. Because the junior officers had traveled 3 hours for the certification, and the segment was 40 minutes from completion, and the activation window was 4 hours, and she had done the math, and the math said she could finish what she had started. She departed the neighboring station 6 minutes after the certification session closed, which put her at the muster point with 20 minutes to spare, and the junior officer's certification was complete, which was not a small thing to her, though she did not explain this to anyone who asked why she had taken the extra 40 minutes. Captain Reuben Cross was the furthest from the muster point of the Captain Zhang's operations desk reached in the first hour, located on a scheduled transit route that passed close enough to the rendezvous vector to intercept if he diverted immediately, which he did, filing the course change with the transit registry, and noting in the accompanying communication to the transit authority that the diversion was temporary, and the original route would resume when operational requirements permitted. The transit authority's automated system flagged the deviation as non-standard. He acknowledged the flag and continued the diversion. Back at the station, Sera Thal's second hour was considerably more demanding than her first, and her first had been demanding enough that she had not had a moment between 3:49 and 600 that she would have characterized as anything other than fully occupied. The attack had not stopped. It had, if anything, settled into a more systematic rhythm after the secondary array's forward section went offline, the kind of rhythm that told an experienced station commander that the attacking force had revised its timeline and was working toward a definite goal rather than simply applying pressure. She had been on enough difficult postings to recognize the difference between an attacker who was hoping she would break and an attacker who was planning for when she broke, and the current situation had the second quality. She filed a status update through the Sol Fleet Command channel at 600, because Zhang had asked her to maintain hourly status updates, and she maintained what she committed to maintaining regardless of how many other things she was simultaneously managing. Status defensive capability now at 31%. Personnel status, 2 injuries both minor both at station. Hull integrity, primary structure intact. Station is holding. She added, at the update's end, a field entry the standard status format did not require, because she had been a commander long enough to understand that the things a status format didn't require were sometimes the things that mattered most. She wrote, "I do not know what resources are inbound or when they will arrive. I want the record to show that this station will hold for the full 4 hours I committed to because the personnel on this station are doing their jobs correctly, and the station's remaining systems are being managed correctly. If the response window cannot be met, that outcome will be the result of the attacking force's capability exceeding our defensive capacity, not the result of any failure of professional execution on the part of anyone currently aboard. She sent it and returned to the tactical console, because the situation required her attention more than the status report did, and the status report was filed. Her executive officer, Subcommander Veth Orel, found her at the tactical console during the brief window between 6:20 and 6:40 that the attack's rhythm produced, a lull she had identified earlier as a probable pattern and was now confirming as the real one, the attacking force's charging cycle for its primary weapons system. "Commander," Veth said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who had something to say and had been choosing his moment for longer than she realized. "You filed the backup request at 3:49. I want to ask you something about it." She did not look up from the tactical display. "Ask." 14 years, he said. "You have never filed a backup request in 14 years of command. The situation this morning warranted it, and you filed correctly, and I am not questioning the decision. I am asking whether you regret it." She was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone considering the question, but the silence of someone who had already answered it, and was deciding how much of the answer was worth saying aloud. "No," she said, "I do not regret it." Even not knowing who responded, or what they sent, or whether it will be enough. "Especially then," she said, "the backup Rick sent was the correct action for this situation. Whether the response is sufficient is not the factor that determines whether the filing was correct. The station needed it. I filed it. That is the entire calculation." She finally looked up from the display, briefly, the particular glance of a commander taking one moment away from the immediate problem to look at the person beside her. "What I regret is that I have not found a way to give you, and the rest of this crew, 2 uninterrupted hours of sleep in the last 6. That is the thing I would change if I could change anything this morning." Veth was quiet for a moment. "Then, you cannot change it." "I know," she said. "File it under things I cannot change and return to your station." He returned to his station. She returned to the tactical display. The lull ended at 6:41, exactly as she had predicted, and she was already accounting for it when it did. At the muster point, which was not a location on any standard navigation chart, but a set of coordinates that the SAL Coordination Fleet's Reserve Activation Protocol established dynamically based on the deployment target, Admiral Zhang's operations desk completed its full complement count at 7:12 and transmitted the result to his command post aboard the fleet's lead vessel, which had cleared dock at 600 and had been running final pre-transit checks since then. 47 ships. The SAL Coordination Fleet's reserve complement, at full activation, was listed in the current protocol as 43 vessels. The additional 4 were vessels whose captains had received the activation notice outside the standard short-notice distribution list, because their positions at activation had placed them within the intercept window by a margin Zhang's operations desk had assessed as worth the expanded notification. He looked at the count for a moment. "Log them in," he said. "All 47, they made the window." "Logging 47, Amara said, from the operations station. "Fleet is at full transitory status on your order, Admiral." He looked at the tactical projection on his primary display, the one that showed Commander Thal's station position and the current timeline. 2 hours and 40 minutes remaining in the 4-hour window she had committed to. Transit time at full fleet speed, 2 hours and 18 minutes. "Transit on my mark," he said. "Mark." There was a moment during the transit that Zhang spent at his command post's personal log terminal rather than the tactical station, because the tactical situation was stable during transit, and the personal log was where he put things that needed to be put somewhere before they became part of the formal record. He wrote, I am deploying 47 reserve vessels in response to a backup request filed by a Cavalry Station commander for 1 to 2 combat-capable vessels. I want to note, for the log's record, that the resource request figure is not the factor I use to determine the response. The request figure tells me what the requesting commander believes she needs. The operational situation tells me what the situation actually requires. Commander Thal's operational situation required a response sufficient to end the engagement rather than prolong it at reduced cost, because a prolonged engagement at reduced cost against a force organized enough to have done its target survey is a prolonged engagement that the station is unlikely to survive long enough to win. The appropriate response to that situation is the response that ends it. 47 ships ends it. He paused. He added, Commander Thal filed a single backup request, precisely formatted, correct channel, correct threat assessment, correct status summary. She asked once, and she asked correctly. The reserve fleet is not a disproportionate response to a request that asked for 1 to 2 vessels. It is a proportionate response to a situation that required 47. The distinction matters, and I want the log to have it clearly. He closed the log entry and returned to the tactical display. Because the transit had 22 minutes remaining, and 22 minutes was enough time to finalize the deployment sequencing, which was where his attention was most useful. Sera's fourth status update, filed at 7:40, was the most difficult one she had written, not because the content was worse than the previous 3, though it was, but because filing it required the specific professional discipline of a commander who was managing an accurate picture of a situation that had developed past the point where accuracy was comfortable. Defensive capability, 19%. Personnel status, 4 injuries, 2 requiring medical attention within the hour, all 4 currently at station because all 4 had specifically declined to leave their stations until relieved. Hull integrity, primary structure intact, secondary structural support in the station's eastern ring showing stress indicators that had not been present in T. He 600 report. She wrote the update carefully, every field entry precise, and she added one more note at the end. She wrote 19% is enough. This station will hold. She sent it. She looked at the tactical display for a long moment, at the numbers it was giving her with the pitiless accuracy she had relied on for 14 years, and she had the particular private conversation with herself that commanders in genuinely difficult situations sometimes had, the one that ran the honest calculation and arrived at an honest answer, and then set the honest answer aside in favor of the one that required no revision of what she was about to do next. The honest calculation said 19%, 4 hours into a sustained attack, was a number that had a direction, and the direction was not improvement. She set it aside. East Ring, secondary structural, she said to her engineering officer. I want real-time monitoring and a maximum load threshold alert on my console. Threshold set, the engineering officer said. Then we hold, Sera said. To every person on the station, hold. The fleet dropped out of transit at 8:14, 26 minutes before the 4-hour commitment window closed, and the first indication Sera had that anything had changed was not the visual feeds or the sensor arrays, but the change in the attacking force's behavior, the particular shift from systematic application of measured pressure to the more urgent, less methodical pattern of a force that had registered a new variable in its operational environment and was recalculating. Commander, Dreshkavan's voice carried something she had not heard from him in 4.5 hours, which was the quality of someone delivering good news, the relief of it only slightly ahead of the professionalism. We're reading incoming contacts on the outer perimeter, multiple contacts. I'm still resolving the count. How many? He was quiet for a moment, working the resolution. 47, he said. Commander, I'm reading 47 incoming contacts. She looked at the tactical display. 47 contacts. resolving on the outer perimeter of the sensor range, with the particular disciplined formation spacing of vessels that had deployed in coordination rather than independently. She had asked for 1 to 2 combat-capable vessels. She stood at the tactical display and looked at 47 ships arriving in formation, and she experienced the specific, private combination of complete professional composure and something that would not have been visible on her face to anyone watching, but that she was aware of somewhere behind the composure, an unfamiliar and entirely involuntary sense that she did not yet have the right word for in cavalry, though the closest approximation was the word that meant the condition of having been answered in a voice considerably larger than the one you used to ask. "All stations," she said, her voice carrying the same level quality it had carried for 4 hours and 41 minutes. "Backup has arrived. Maintain current positions until stand-down is confirmed." Zhang's personal flagship hailed the station at 8:17, and Sera took the call at the communications console, because some calls required being at the console rather than managing them from the tactical station. "Commander Thal." The voice was calm, direct, carrying the specific professional warmth of someone who had been concerned and was now relieved but was not going to make a performance of either state. "Admiral Zhang, Sol Coordination Fleet, your station is intact." "Intact," she confirmed. 19% defensive capability at last status update filed at 7:40. 4 personnel with injuries. Eastern structural ring showing stress indicators. The attacking force has begun withdrawal since your arrival. "We're tracking the withdrawal. They won't re-engage." A brief pause. "You said you could hold 4 hours." "I said it and I held it." "I know." Another brief pause, and she had the impression, listening to it, of a person choosing the version of what they wanted to say that was most accurate rather than most formal. "Commander, I want to explain something about the response you're looking at on your sensors, because you're going to need to include it in your report, and I want you to have the right framing before you write it." "I will include what I observed," she said. "I observed 47 vessels." "You did. Your backup request specified 1 to 2. I want to explain why the response was 47. "I assumed," she said, "that you assessed the situation differently than my request form indicated." "I assessed the situation from the operational status data in your request and your 3 subsequent updates," he said. 40% defensive capability at 349, degrading on a consistent curve, under attack by a force that had done its survey work and was working systematically through your systems. 1 or 2 vessels would have arrived at a stop. Tian at 19% capability and extended your survival window. 47 vessels arrive at a situation and end it. The warmth in his voice was still there, underneath the professional precision. "You asked for what you thought you could justify requesting. I responded to what the situation actually required. Those are different calculations, and I want you to understand why I made the one I made instead of the one you suggested." Sera was quiet for a moment, a cavalry kind of quiet, the particular quality of someone receiving information that is accurate and significant and deserves genuine consideration rather than an immediate response. "You are saying," she said, "that the size of a backup request is not the primary variable determining the size of the response." "I'm saying that for us it isn't," Zhang said. "You asked once, Commander. You asked correctly, with the right channel and the right language and an honest operational status that told me exactly what I needed to know to make the right call. That's all it takes. We don't scale the response to the size of the request. We scale it to the size of the need." She looked at the sensor display, at 47 ships holding formation outside her damaged station, and she found herself, for the second time in the past several minutes, in contact with the feeling she did not yet have the right word for in cavalry. "I want to ask you something directly," she said, in the interest of having it in the official record. "Ask." "If I had not filed the backup request, If I had managed the situation without asking, what would have happened? Zhang was quiet for a moment. You would have held, he said, for a while, and then you wouldn't have. And nobody outside your station would have known until the silence started, because we don't look for stations that aren't asking. We respond to stations that are. His voice was even, direct, and it carried no judgment, only the plain weight of a fact that mattered. The asking is the thing, Commander. It's not a weakness and it's not a concession. It's the mechanism. The fleet exists for exactly this. But the fleet doesn't come unless someone tells us where to go. Sera filed her formal after-action report 3 days later, from the station's partially restored communications array. With the hull repairs underway and the injured personnel in full recovery, and the sensor display showing exactly the same outer perimeter that had shown 47 incoming contacts 4 days earlier, now showing exactly as much empty, unremarkable space as it had shown before 3:47 on the morning, she had filed the most precisely worded backup request of her career. The report's formal fields she completed with the same care she had given every field entry throughout the event itself. Precise, accurate, fully documented, every timeline entry confirmed against the station's operational logs. The report's personal observation section, which the Kavari Compact's after-action format included as optional, she filled for the first time in 14 years of filing after-action reports. She wrote, "I want to document something that is not captured in the formal field entries of this report, but that I believe is the most significant finding of this event. I filed a backup request at 3:49 specifying 1 to 2 combat-capable vessels. The response was 47 vessels. The response was appropriate for the situation. My request was not an underestimate of the situation. It was an accurate representation of what I believed a requesting officer was permitted to ask for." Admiral Zhang's response clarified that the requesting officer's belief about what could be asked for is not the relevant variable. The relevant variable is the situation. I asked once. The fleet came. The mechanism is simpler than I understood it to be before this event, and I want that simplicity in the record. Ask correctly, through the correct channel with an accurate status. That is the entire requirement. She paused, looking at the display for a moment before completing the entry. She added, "I regret that it took me 14 years and a situation I could not manage alone to discover this. I do not plan to need 14 more years before filing the next request that a situation warrants. That is the operational revision I am making based on this event, and I am noting it here because operational revisions should be in the record." She filed the report. She found the final message from Zhang's command channel waiting when she checked her formal correspondence queue 3 days after the event, filed not as a command communication, but as a personal message, the routing header of the kind reserved for off-record notes between officers who had worked a situation together and wanted the working acknowledged separately from the formal documentation. It read, "Commander Thal, the formal record is complete on our end as well. I wanted to add one thing outside the formal document. Asian, because I think it belongs somewhere even if it doesn't belong in a report. In 11 years of managing the Sol Coordination Fleet's reserve complement, I have activated the full reserve 3 times. The first time was a system-wide emergency that everyone knew about before we deployed. The second time was a cascading infrastructure failure that had been building for months. This time was a single backup request from a Kavari station commander who asked for 1 to 2 vessels and got 47, and who held a 4-hour window with 19% defensive capability because she said she would and she meant it. I want you to know that the third activation is the one I'm going to remember longest, not because it was the most complex, because it was the clearest. You asked once. We heard you. That's all it takes. You and Zhang." Sera read the message once, then set down the terminal and looked out at the emptiness beyond the station's observation port, the particular unhurried looking of someone who has received something they want to sit with before they decide what to do with it. She had never, in 14 years, understood asking for help as a mechanism rather than a concession. She understood it now. She filed a brief response to Zhang's personal message, the only personal communication she had sent to a flag officer in 14 years of service. It read, "Admiral noted, thank you for the fleet. Next time I will ask sooner, Sera Thal." She sent it and returned to the work of putting her station back in order, because the station needed it and she was the person present with the capacity to do it, and the rest was obvious. If this one reached somewhere the others did not, it's in the personal observation section of a cavalry commander's after-action report. 14 years of filing after-action reports without ever filling in the optional section, and then one event that produced the one thing worth writing there. I asked once. The fleet came. The mechanism is simpler than I understood it to be. Sera Thal didn't learn something complicated about humanity on that morning. She learned something simple, the simplest possible version of a thing that humans have apparently always known. Ask correctly through the correct channel with an honest status. That's the entire requirement. The fleet doesn't scale its response to the size of the request. It scales to the size of the need. 47 ships for a request that asked for 2 because 2 was what the request form seemed to call for, and 47 was what the situation called for, and Zhang knew the difference. She knows it now too. That's enough, stay human.